There has been a lot of drama surrounding Hans Niemann, as we all know. A lot of accusations of cheating, a lot of tough talk. And, I don't know whether he cheated or not, but here's one thing I am confident about. He's not cheating right now, and he's playing chess at a pretty high level, at the very least, at a level that matches his rating. So, the one thing we can say, whether he's broken the rules or not, is that Hans Niemann is a very, very strong player and that his rating seems to be accurate. He is currently playing in the World Rapid Championship. And in this game, he takes on Richard Rapport, also a very great player. There's no controversy with Rapport as far as I know. But he's a very strong player. This game was played at 15 minutes for each side with a 10-second increment. You'll see the ratings here: 2802 for Rapport and 2592 for Niemann. Now, those ratings are rapid ratings. Those are not the classical ratings. That's why they may be a little bit different than what you're used to. But let's jump right in and take a look. Hans Niemann has black. Richard Rapport has white. He begins with e4. Niemann responds with e5. Bishop c4. So Rapport plays the bishop's opening. A lot of times this is used to avoid the Petrov defense, which would be knight f3, knight f6. So knight f6 was played by black, and then d3 by white. And usually this means they're going to be angling for the f4 pawn break if they can get it. Almost like a slower king's gambit idea, breaking on the f-file. A knight to c6 was played. One thing about the bishop's opening, it does allow black to make the move c6 here, with the idea of playing d5 and expanding in the center. But knight to c6 was played instead. And here, if Rapport plays knight to f3, you're back into a standard Italian game, having avoided Petrov's defense. But instead, he plays knight to c3, continuing on with a thematic idea, not blocking the f-pawn, right? He wants to play f2, f4. But that allows black to play this move, knight to a5. Bishop c5 is common. Bishop b4 with the idea of following up with d5 because of the pin is common. But instead, here he plays knight to a5, going right after the two bishops. The bishop moves to b3. He takes it. Pawn takes it, and black now has the two bishops. White has a half-open a-file, however. They might be able to get some activity down that file. And here Niemann plays d6, a fairly passive move. The most common is d5, just completely opening up the center and liberating both of those bishops. But d5 is a little bit slower. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just a little slower. And here, Rapport plays f4, the main thematic idea in the bishop's opening, breaking with the f-pawn, and Niemann takes the pawn. Bishop takes f4, and here white has a comfortable development, and it's probably a little bit better, but black doesn't have any easy targets and has a playable position. Bishop e7, knight f3, castles, castles, and now d5. Black wants to reduce white's space advantage in the center, and what white does is expand the space advantage. He plays e5, queen to e1, with the idea of backing up the e-pawn or shifting over to the king side is not a bad idea, but instead, Rapport plays e5. And this looks strong, but the truth is, black can be pretty happy with this pawn lunge. It does give white space, but it limits the mobility of the bishop and weakens the light squares a little bit. So the knight goes back to e8, the pawn goes to d4, and now bishop to f5. Because of that advance, this light squared bishop is able to place itself on a very nice diagonal, aiming at the c2 pawn, king to h1, and now c6. And if we were to say what is white's worst placed piece, it's easy to see the knight at c3 is poorly placed. He's going to need to shift that knight to find activity. He can't go to b5. So he plays knight to e2, improving the worst placed piece, aiming at knight to g3, which of course would gain a tempo against the bishop at f5. Knight to c7, aiming for e6. Knight g3, bishop g6, c3, and knight to e6. This is a very strong square for the knight, blockading this pawn at e5, gaining a tempo against the bishop at f4. The bishop goes to e3, and here Niemann plays a very interesting move. He plays the move f5. Now, if white doesn't take that pawn, it leaves black with a mobile kingside majority, 3 versus 2, and his knight on e6 is very strong, blockading the passed pawn on e5. Yes, that pawn is passed and protected. However, the knight, get that off of there, the knight at e6, it more than makes up for that. So basically, Rapport has to take that pawn en passant, which he does on f6. Bishop takes f6. And here Black would love to play a5, fixing this b3 weakness in place. So to prevent that, Rapport plays b4 first before Black can play a5. He goes ahead and plays a5 now, and we have some exchanges, and Black ends up with his queen on a5. So here, White plays knight to e5. Now, there's a threat involved here. He's threatening queen to g4, which would hit the knight at e6, as well as the bishop at g6, and Niemann has to do something about it. So he goes ahead and takes the knight off of the board, giving up the two bishops. Rook takes rook as an intermezzo, knight takes, and then pawn takes bishop. And so he has weakened Rapport's pawn structure a little bit, but that e5 pawn is very valuable. And Niemann is going to have to keep e6 under control to keep that pawn from advancing. Also notice we have opposite colored bishops in the position as well now. Queen to a2, Niemann attacks the b2 pawn. Queen to c1, defending the pawn. Now queen to c4. Queen to a1, threatening to play queen to a8, which would attack b7 and pin the knight on f8. And here h4 was played by Hans Niemann, a very strong move, threatening to kick this knight away. And the knight doesn't have many options. It really can only go to f1 without being captured at the moment. But then queen to a8 is played, pinning the knight. And now, if Niemann goes ahead and continues with, say, h4, then instead of moving the knight, Rapport could play e6, threatening e7, which takes advantage of the pinned knight at f8. And then after pawn takes knight e7, the queen can go to f1 with check, the bishop blocks, gh2, but then you have some exchanges on f8, and you end up in this endgame. And yes, Black is up a pawn, but with bishops of opposite color, this should be a drawn position. So in this position, Hans Niemann comes up with an absolutely brilliant move. Looking at that variation we just saw, what move can he make to improve that so he has a winning position? That's right, he plays the move d4. Now, his queen has access to the e6 square, and he's going to be able to, basically this is just a devastating blow. By the way, if you're getting value from this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button and join the channel. So bishop takes d4, now h4. Now the knight really has nowhere to go. If he plays e6 as in the other variation, then just queen takes e6. If the knight goes to f1, queen to e1, pinning the knight, king g1, bishop to d3, and Black just wins the pinned knight. So Rapport plays b3, trying to distract the queen. The queen could actually just take on b3 if he wanted to, but it doesn't matter. He plays queen to f7, e6, queen takes e6, queen takes b7, queen to e1 check, blocks with the bishop, and then pawn takes knight, and Black is up a piece, and Rapport resigned, and Hans Niemann won. Now, even after going over this great game from Hans Niemann, there are still some great chess you're missing out on. To fix that problem, believe it or not, the game you're going to want to check out is in this video right here, so be sure to watch that next for some incredible chess. Bye.